In 2019, if someone told you we'd all be locked in our homes for months, wearing masks and fighting over toilet paper, you'd think that they were describing the plot of a bad B-movie. But what if that movie never premiered? What if COVID-19 simply never happened? An alternate political landscape. Let's rewind to late 2019. Donald Trump was sailing towards the 2020 election with a strong wind at his back. The economy was humming along with unemployment at a historic low of 3.5%. The stock market was setting record highs, and his base remained fiercely loyal. Meanwhile, Democrats were entangled in a messy primary battle with over 20 candidates initially vying for the nomination, from progressive firebrands like Bernie Sanders to moderates like Joe Biden. In this alternate timeline without COVID-19, Trump's campaign strategy would have remained focused on economic prosperity. His rallies would have continued drawing massive crowds across battleground states, with iconic monuments like his packed arena events in Michigan and Pennsylvania reinforcing his populist message. Trump maintained a relatively stable 40 to 45% approval rating before the virus hit, numbers that likely would have held steady without the pandemic's economic disruption and death toll to manage. While Trump barnstormed the country, the Democratic primary would have evolved differently as well. Biden's comeback, which began with his South Carolina victory, might not have solidified so quickly. Without COVID restrictions forcing campaigns online, candidates like Warren or Sanders could have continued their grassroots organizing and in-person town halls. Imagine Sanders filling college auditoriums or Warren's selfie lines continuing to build personal connections with others. Traditional retail politics that became impossible during lockdowns. Election mechanics would have remained conventional without the pandemic's influence. The massive expansion of mail-in voting simply wouldn't have occurred, and traditional voting patterns favoring Republicans with lower turnout would have prevailed. Trump's campaign was built for this conventional approach. On the international stage, several parallel scenarios would have unfolded differently. Brexit implementation would likely have proceeded with fewer complications, as UK-EU negotiations wouldn't have been repeatedly sidelined by pandemic responses. Similarly, US-China relations would have continued focusing on trade and intellectual property disputes rather than virus blame games. Election night itself would have looked dramatically different. Results would have been known much sooner without widespread mail-in voting. Political analysts across the spectrum have acknowledged that absent the pandemic's disruption, Trump's re-election prospects were strong, with economic fundamentals typically favoring the incumbent. The economy that never crashed. The economic fundamentals that might have secured Trump's second term were about to face their greatest test since the Great Depression. Before COVID struck, Americans were experiencing the lowest unemployment rates in half a century, and inflation was comfortably resting around 2%. This was part of the longest economic expansion in American history. Economic forecasters were projecting continued growth through 2020, with stable market conditions and steady job creation. Few economists saw any warning signs of the economic whiplash that was about to hit. Imagine a world where that trajectory continued uninterrupted. A world where store shelves remained fully stocked, computer chips stayed plentiful, and shipping containers moved efficiently across oceans like blood cells through healthy economic arteries. The contrast with what actually happened is stark. Instead of continued prosperity, we witnessed scenes that seemed ripped from a dystopian film. Empty downtown streets, businesses with permanently closed signs, and stock markets in freefall. The pandemic triggered the most significant economic downturn since the Great Depression, with effects that continued to reverberate years later. Inflation illustrates this alternate economic timeline perfectly. While our pre-pandemic economy maintained inflation around the Federal Reserve's target of 2%, reality veered dramatically. Inflation surged to 4.7% in 2021 before peaking at a staggering 9.1% in June 2022, the highest rate in over 40 years. For average Americans, this meant watching grocery store bills climb week after week while paychecks struggled to keep pace. The pandemic also reshaped where and how we live. Remote work adoption skyrocketed from about 20% before the pandemic to over 60% at its peak in April 2020. This triggered massive population shifts as people fled cities for more affordable suburban and rural areas. Cities like New York and San Francisco experienced significant population declines while surrounding areas boomed, sending housing markets into unprecedented territory. Downtown business districts transformed almost overnight. Office buildings stood eerily empty as companies adapted to remote operations. Many small businesses that depended on office worker foot traffic couldn't survive. The Great Resignation saw millions of Americans reevaluating their relationship with employment, seeking better compensation, flexible arrangements, and improved work environments. The pandemic compressed years of gradual workplace evolution into months, permanently altering our economic landscape. The slower digital revolution. The pandemic revolution that transformed our workplace habits didn't happen in isolation. It triggered a parallel digital transformation that might have been the most visible change of all. Before 2020, if you'd mentioned Zoom to the average person, they'd probably have asked if you were talking about a camera function or perhaps a children's TV show from the late 90s. In our alternate timeline, that obscurity might have persisted for years longer. But what would our digital landscape look like if we'd continued on that gradual path? The answer might surprise you. Digital technology was growing before COVID struck, but at a measured, almost leisurely pace. Many companies explored remote work options and virtual collaboration tools, but met substantial resistance. Remember when your doctor insisted you come into the office for routine matters? When your boss claimed certain tasks could only be done in person? That resistance reflected deeply ingrained beliefs about how businesses and services should operate. Then came the pandemic lockdowns, and practically overnight, adoption charts that had shown steady growth shot upwards at angles that would make mountain climbers nervous. Like seeds dormant in desert soil suddenly blooming after rainfall, technologies that had waited for their moment suddenly flourished. Educational institutions provide a dramatic example of this transformation. Schools worldwide had been gradually incorporating digital tools, but the fundamental model remained unchanged for generations. The forced experiment in remote learning, despite its challenges, proved that alternative models could work when necessary. Similarly, healthcare underwent revolutionary change. Pre-pandemic telehealth adoption was minimal, with complex regulations limiting its use. When COVID made in-person visits dangerous, those regulations changed overnight. Companies like Teladoc saw their user base expand by 50% in weeks rather than years. Delivery services and contactless shopping transformed from conveniences into essential services. Companies like Shopify helped businesses compress 5-year digital transformation plans into mere months as survival depended on serving customers without physical contact. Some technologies, like video conferencing, were merely adopted faster. They existed but hadn't found their moment. Others, like mRNA vaccine platforms, experienced genuine acceleration in their development timeline, pushed forward by unprecedented global cooperation. The social fabric unworn. Beyond the acceleration of technology, the pandemic rewrote an unwritten social contract that most of us never consciously acknowledged. The invisible bubble of personal space, that unspoken boundary we maintain around ourselves, underwent a radical transformation that would have seemed bizarre in our alternate COVID-free timeline. Think about it. Before 2020, would you ever have even registered how close the person behind you stood in a checkout line? That awareness, now heightened to an almost instinctive level, represents one of the most profound social shifts of our lifetime. Prior to the pandemic, Western societies operated with minimal concern for public health in daily interactions. Passengers coughed on crowded subway cars, handshakes were automatic greetings during flu season, and personal space boundaries remained flexible and rarely discussed. Then came what sociologists call the Great Behavioral Reset. The speed of adaptation was remarkable. Behaviors entirely foreign to us in 2019, maintaining 6-foot distances, elbow bumps instead of handshakes, mask wearing in public, became second nature within weeks. This normalization demonstrated our adaptability while leaving lasting psychological imprints. As isolation stretched on, our relationship with community itself transformed. Consider 17-year-old Maya, who spent her entire junior year in her bedroom, attending virtual prom alone and missing crucial peer interactions. Her experience mirrors thousands of young people who developed social anxiety during these formative years. Therapists report that many continue experiencing heightened discomfort in crowds, even as restrictions have lifted. These psychological shifts coincided with physical environmental changes. One-way systems in stores, plexiglass barriers, and spaced seating appeared practically overnight. Enhanced ventilation systems and hand sanitizing stations remained permanent fixtures, visible reminders of an invisible threat. Western attitudes towards mask wearing underwent perhaps the most significant transformation. Once viewed as unusual, face coverings gained acceptance as protective features. This shift reflects a deeper change in how individuals perceive community health responsibility. The pandemic's impact extended to institutional trust as well. When a California mayor urged residents to stay home while simultaneously dining at an exclusive restaurant, a contradiction captured in viral photos, public confidence plummeted. This type of inconsistency created lasting suspicion, particularly among already marginalized communities, constituting one of the pandemic's most consequential social legacies. Conclusion. So what have we learned from our journey through this alternate timeline? While we've imagined a world without COVID-19, the pandemic's actual legacy lives on in our heightened awareness of public health infrastructure. The CDC's emphasis on vaccination, improved hygiene, and air quality initiatives represents a new foundation for pandemic preparedness. The inconsistent messaging during the crisis revealed vulnerabilities in our communication systems that require addressing before the next global challenge. Our interconnected world means disruptions cascade throughout society, a reality shaping future crisis response. As we move forward, how will you contribute to building resilience in this complex, interdependent global system we all share? Stay tuned.